Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast. Today is our great pleasure to have with us Julia van Sommen from the Sample Room. Julia, welcome.
Hello, Debbie, and thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It really is. Yeah, it really is. It's dawn here and dusk in Australia.
It certainly is. It's 7:30 at night. It's just started in summer, so we still have some light outside, but so the days are getting longer here.
And they're getting shorter here. Very, very short. Oh, it's great. It's great. Absolutely lovely to have you. Really is. We've been following each other and chatting for quite some time and have worked on a couple of projects with Vespa actually, which has been brilliant. You have an absolute wealth of experience. And I'm really so happy that you've agreed to join us today to share that with the audience. So Julia, in summary, could you share your career journey? How did you enter the industry and when and why did you start the Sample Room?
Great question. Thanks, Debbie. So I have been sewing since before I was 10.
Okay.
And the reason I know that is I won my first award at the local show for a quilt that I made when I was 10, which was sort of a bit of a stamp. And I moved very quickly into making my own clothes. So it's something that I've always done. And I guess it's something that I was always good at. So it was a very natural progression for me to move into fashion after I finished high school.
Okay.
So I studied and I entered the industry, it's really about 30 years ago now. My main skill, I guess, is a pattern maker, but I've worked in all areas of fashion. So I've worked as a sample machinist, as a designer. I've run businesses and looked after knitting mills. I've worked with offshore manufacturing and local manufacturing, and I started Sample Room about 13 years ago now, maybe coming up to 14 years ago, as I really saw that there was a need for the skills that I had for a number of people, and I didn't really want to get stuck in one business. I liked the variety. I knew that I had a wealth of knowledge to share, and really I didn't really want to get stuck in the office politics of one business anymore, so I started my own business. And it's been a wonderful journey. I started off with just myself as it's called the Sample Room because I realised there was a real need for samples to be made with pattern makers. Having those two disciplines separate is quite frustrating for a pattern maker and a sample machinist. And I'm a pattern maker who's also been a sample machinist, so I had that skill. So started off just by myself and then grew the team, and now we're a team of 12 over pattern makers and cutters and sample machinists and production machinists.
Amazing. So what services do you provide as a Sample Room, and in which sectors do you operate?
We really work with anything to do with fabric.
Okay.
So that could be clothing, it could be accessories. I have a background, I like to say, from wetsuits to wedding dresses. I've worked across a whole broad range of products. So there really isn't a lot that I can't do apart from underwire bras and men's tailoring. Lingerie is a totally different skill set. And whilst I would love to learn it, I probably do enough. I don't need more on the plate. So within our business, we are primarily a development house. So we work with designers across men's, women's and children, sportswear, swimwear, evening wear, wedding dresses. And they come to us with an idea and then we create the pattern, the sample, all the specifications and go through that development process to fit the garment with the designer, make the alterations and prepare it for production. Mm-hmm. We also have small run production in-house, which we introduced probably about 7 or 8 years ago because we found that so many of our clients were finding it too difficult to find production houses for small run. And so we introduced that, and that area has grown a lot in the last couple of years. And then alongside that, we also run a mentoring program, which we can talk about later. But that was really introduced because we work with so many startup designers who just didn't know what to do. So we help them through that.
It's a huge problem. It's a huge, huge problem, isn't it? Because we've democratized, we're going to talk about digital printing later too. We've democratized the space. So anybody can do anything. But we all know that our skills are so often in silos, aren't they? And we don't really appreciate them until you start to try to develop a new product. And in the sew manufacture space and the design space, there are so many things there that can go terribly, terribly wrong, and quite often do if you don't get the right expertise. But they don't go wrong till you get your stuff back from production, and you've got samples or, production volumes of sewn garments that just don't have the fine detail that you expected your manufacturer to deliver. So, how do you start with, say, a young designer, Julia? So say somebody came to you, they've got their vision, they've got their sketches, they've got everything. It's such a difficult road, isn't it? And yet you have that skill set that can resolve all of those little pain points across there to make sure they're as well prepared as they can be.
Yes, and look, it is a huge journey, and the program has evolved in a huge way since I first launched it. Yeah. I always tell people the story that we launched Sample Room when Instagram and Facebook and Pinterest launched. Okay. So for the first time ever, anyone who's been in the industry for any length of time, it was unheard of to start your own business as soon as you left fashion school. You had to have years of experience in the industry and a lot of money, because you really had to go directly into wholesale or into your own retail store.
Yes.
And so it totally changed the game. And all of a sudden we had instant access to our clients. We could make one garment at a time, pop it up on Instagram. Someone would send us money and we would sell that. So through that process, we had so many people come to us who didn't even have any experience, but they were really good and they knew how to manage these platforms. So they had the customer base, but they just needed to know. And within 2 months, they were saying to me, "This is too hard, Julia. People ask me these questions. I've got no idea what the words mean. I feel like I'm behind the 8 ball and I'm hitting the brick wall." So I thought, this isn't very good for business to have people just stopping after 2 months. So the first fashion label launchpad was a group of startups around a table once a month. And I would guide them through what they needed to do in that really 6-month cycle, which somebody who knows what they're doing, it's really a 6-month cycle. When you're new, it's really a year-long cycle because you don't realize how much is involved.
Yeah.
And then I had people interstate ask for the information, so we put it online. And then I recorded the whole program, and it sat like that for about really 7 or 8 years. And just in the last 2 years, I've re-recorded the whole program. So expanded the content, modernized it, I guess, further, brought in more information that I know people need. And as I have done that, I've taken what I've learned from what I see startups go through and introduced that. For example, people come to me with an idea, but they don't often think about how they're going to sell it or who they're going to market it to. Yep. And a lot of people think that you build a website and you have an Instagram following and that's all that you need. And it's not true at all. There is so much that is involved in marketing, and it really is a critical part of any successful label. So we start off by really a process of explaining who your customer is and what you're looking to do, so that myself as the pattern maker can see your vision and the graphic designer can see your vision and the web developer, and then you build those foundations so that when the time comes to market, that you know who your customer is. It's the same for any industry, but for some reason people think in fashion, they don't always think about that.
Do you find as well, Julia, that it definitely happens here in Europe, that graduates leave their universities and they think they're primed to get everything right, and then it's really sad because they just don't have. It's a lottery here of which university you go to get whether you get the skill set that you need when you leave. But it's just not easy to have a drawing and then convert it into a garment, is it at all? No. I mean, they don't. Do you find that there's a huge gap of information for tech packs, for example? People don't understand how to make a garment?
I know. And tech packs are they're not a dirty word in our business, but we have a lot of frustration with tech packs. And, I always say to any student, school was never meant to equip you with knowing everything. It's meant to give you a really broad overview, really, so you can say, do you still want to be in this industry? This is the reality. You may have thought it was flicking through magazines, but this is the reality of what happens. Are you still interested in pursuing that, and what area? And then you would get a job in that particular field and you would further your knowledge base there. The schools are teaching tech packs, which for a long time has been really critical because we've very much been in an offshore manufacturing environment. But now with the move to onshore, there's just a lot of mistruths and a lot of information on the internet that talk about tech packs, and it's not the whole picture. So people will send us tech packs nearly every day. We have people contacting us with tech packs, and we always have a look at them, and they vary wildly from a sketch and a little bit of fabric to a whole lot of things that say factory to source, which is my favorite or least favorite saying. Factory to source or dyed to match is another one that really, really annoys me, because that is what happens overseas, but you don't do that locally. And so it really is two totally different industries. And if you know a local manufacturing industry, it's easy overseas. But if you only know overseas, then it's impossible for local, because there's a whole lot of mysterious stuff that happens after you send that document. So people sometimes, I think, that they think a tech pack turns magically into production, but that's really just a design brief.
Yep.
And it's a design brief in the way that the factory can then come back to you and say, but you told me this. But, you know, there's no flexibility, there's no creativity in that process. And so it really is more of a hindrance than a help for a lot of people. So we say, we don't need a tech pack, we just have a conversation.
Okay, and you're encouraging that then. I always have as well, most definitely. Get as close to your manufacturer as possible.
Yeah, so we have a different process where we talk about a design brief. We create a design brief document from that, and that is the start of a tech pack. But a tech pack really is, as a technical document, changes when you put that graded specification in it.
Yep.
So that's the measurements of the pattern over all the sizes, which is impossible until you've made a pattern.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're pulling numbers from thin air. And as a pattern maker, my least favorite thing to do in everything that I do, and I have a team of 12, so there's a lot of annoying things you do as a business owner, is trying to make a pattern fit to a spec that has been, the numbers have come from elsewhere that I don't know.
Really, it's so difficult.
Well, people often have a garment, a pattern and a specification, and they don't match, and you don't know which one you're meant to be following.
Yes.
So we say that a specification is extracted from the pattern from your approved garment.
It's interesting, isn't it, really? Like you say, it's just being able to tie all those knots together, but know which ones are incorrect from the beginning, so you don't get through manufacturing. It's so hard, isn't it? Would you say then, just to summarise in that section, how would you summarise and say the industry has changed just in the last 2 years?
We've had a lot of
COVID, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I think that it was starting to change previous, because people have realised that the prices overseas are no longer what they used to be.
Okay.
But definitely there have been a lot more people wanting to move back locally, and a lot of bigger brands looking to move back to local manufacturing, which is fantastic, but we have a very small industry to support that. So it's been quite difficult to manage that. I'm not sure if that will continue, but what I do encourage people to do is to bring their development back locally, because then they can be geo-flexible wherever they go. So then they may test their product in the local market, then they may move to other countries. So it's not all based around one particular country. For Australians, very much China. They could go to Fiji, they could go to Indonesia, they could go to Vietnam, they could go to China, India, Bangladesh. They can really be quite flexible based on their quantities and the products that they're making. So there's definitely a move when people have realised that they can't rely on their factory as well. So they're having to move countries, and what that means for them with the ownership of their IP, because a lot of the time the factory have owned the IP. There has been a move. A lot more people have wanted to start businesses during the pandemic. They've had time on their hands. So that has been a big move for us. But of all the extra communication and contacts we had with people, it didn't really translate, because I think a lot of people still tried to pursue their offshore in whatever way they could, because they knew it and they didn't know that local development process.
It's so interesting, isn't it? We see that here too. Online entrepreneurial brands are absolutely flourishing. The trick is to remain out there and to make sure that your business is viable, and that you invest in your product knowledge and your supply chain to make sure that it all keeps going, really. And you have that continuity of supply, which I think is always a huge, huge problem for everybody, isn't it? Choosing the right manufacturer.
I definitely have seen that the price of garments have increased and the price of locally made garments are definitely sitting where they should be. So I feel like the retail price point in the market has definitely split into an obvious locally produced product range and an offshore produced product range, which I love because now it makes it much easier for somebody if they want to work locally, that there are a lot more people in that space charging what they should.
Okay, so they're getting a fair price for their products, do you think? And
Yep,
the
definitely.
customer, the end customer, is willing to pay a little bit more, Julia, would you say, to know that it's a local garment?
I was actually talking the other day with one of the universities here. I had a coffee with one of the heads of the school, and she mentioned that one of our major retailers has now an Australian-made program, and they're bringing back some of their original garments. So they've got a shirt, it's a chambray shirt for men, and they are charging $160 for that shirt as an Australian-made product, where they could never get more than $120 as a made-in-China product. And they are selling out. They cannot keep up with demand. So people are happy to spend more money as long as you can really prove and talk about the fact that you are making locally or you are using local fabrics, or it's telling the story really, which is all about the marketing.
It's interesting, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see how that if we won't see this for a little while, but if people are willing to pay a little bit more, are they going to buy less in that niche market? So are they buying for longevity? They're happy to pay for something and think, no, I'm going to keep that for 3, 4, 5 years or longer if it sits well in my wardrobe.
I think that's really critical, and that's a whole other conversation about sustainability and what's happening in the industry around the world. And I think that is a critical conversation that we need to have about the overproduction of products and the waste of faulty garments as they come into any country. It's not just in Australia. And I think that local can talk a lot to that, and also these different business models or actually charging the correct price so everyone's paid fairly and you can actually have a viable business from it.
Social responsibility. Yeah, definitely. So important. And the fashion industry typically has such a terrible reputation for that. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we can actually all together clean up the whole thing, really? I think that's probably a little naive. But, you know, if even a small proportion of us try to do better, then that's progress, isn't it, really? If you had to summarise then, Julia, what would you say the main challenges are for independent designers and brands? We had to drill that down. What do people have to look out for?
So if someone was a startup and hadn't experienced the industry before as an independent designer, it would really be about understanding the process, because there is such a small pool of people who can do the work, whether it's pattern makers or manufacturers, that if they even hear a hint of someone not knowing what they're talking about, then they're not even going to answer your phone call. It's in the too hard basket. And so they will really struggle with getting any traction with anybody who can actually do the work if they don't know how that process works.
Yeah.
So we receive phone calls all the time and they say, I can't believe that you've actually answered my email. I've emailed 25 people and no one's answered my email. And there's a reason for that. And the reason why we're so open to it is because we have the support program, but that you have to invest in that to learn. There is such a lack of manufacturing around. At the moment, our manufacturing area is booked out till May next year.
Wow.
Which is crazy. We've never been booked out this long before. And there's a few other reasons apart from what's happening at the moment. We've changed a process for ourselves in our business that we give people their development and production prices right up front. So that kind of bill shock happens early on, and once they progress, then they're happy to go the whole way through. So we've got an influx of a lot of people. For a lot of startup designers, the process is far harder than anyone would ever imagine. And the concern that people have with not selling can really stop them at a lot of places. Yep. The fear of making the wrong decision throughout that process, whether it's, am I choosing the right designs or the right colours or the right fabric? Will this sell? will I find customers can really stop a lot of designers along the way. So we try our hardest to help people by doing very small quantities. So they're testing the market in a really small way and building up their client base rather than these numbers of 100 or 200 pieces. It's just too much for a startup when they don't have the email list or the market to sell to.
It's interesting, isn't it, really? You know, so many people just don't think about the whole scenario. They don't have a strong business plan A, plan B. And again, that kind of comes from education too, doesn't it, really?
Or they have an over-ambitious plan and they don't know how they're going to get there. They think because every factory that they call up says their minimums are 300, they think that that's the norm. Until we say, we've got clients who have been in business for 5-10 years who still are making less than 100 per style, and they have an active database of people. When you don't have an active database, that can just kill you with the first production run.
It does. It's just a complete freeze of cash flow, isn't it? All your money's tied up in stock.
Yes. Or you've got the same thing on your website for 3 years and no one comes back to buy because they've seen that already.
Yeah, interesting. Although I've seen a few people try to reverse that scenario recently, whereby by trying to build a loyal bases, but not having anything new, and that's their USP. Nothing new and no sale. Products are always at the same price, which is kind of refreshing, really. It's a different business model. Let's see how those goes. But there is a huge market. There's room for everybody, isn't there? Most definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Julia, I watched one of your webinars recently, and I have to say to anybody and everybody, you must watch them. It was so good. It was absolutely brilliant. And it kind of prompted me to get back in touch and organise the video podcast as well today. Now, the webinar in question was about reshoring, etc. So obviously, can we drill down to that? Is reshoring real? And what are the challenges and the benefits?
Thank you for joining me on that podcast. It was so nice to see your
name.
The podcast that we're talking about is called The True Cost of Offshore versus Onshore, which I started in 2019. And the reason why I first introduced it, I've worked with both onshore and offshore, and I had so many people call us up saying they'd had such a bad experience with offshore, and we hear the horror stories of faulty garments and various things. And I used to think, I really just don't think it's that different. And it wasn't until I put everything into a spreadsheet that one day I realized it actually is not as different as what people think. When you bring all the prices in, for example, freight costs, exchange rate, quality of product, the faulty goods, the development costs, everything all together. And so it wasn't until we actually sat down and put that together and went, wow, this is actually quite an eye-opener. So the reason why I love doing that webinar is because I just want to dispel the whole myth about the cost of garments, because it is one of the biggest hurdles to people moving back onshore.
Yes.
Because they're concerned that, well, it is so much cheaper overseas, and so they keep on getting drawn back into that. So when we expose that myth, then all of a sudden it's now up to people to make the decision without that massive hurdle in the way. So onshoring is very real, and there's so many benefits to onshoring that people, until they experience it, I have people all the time say to me, this is so easy. And I say, yes, it should be. It actually is. Without the frustration of communicating back and forth with somebody or receiving samples that you've asked for one thing to be fixed and then 3 other things need fixing that didn't need fixing before, or opening up boxes of garments and things are faulty is a really big one and a very sad one.
It's good business. I think what was also brilliant in there too was your spreadsheets, which you must get a great reaction when young designers or independent. Now, I keep saying young, it's not true. Anybody that decides, right, I'm going to have a fashion brand, it could be any age at all. But those spec sheets are so helpful, because they really drill down into the nitty gritty of everything. So you cost everything, and then you really are aware of your true margins and what you can and can't create. And most importantly, what you're going to sell it for.
Well, this is true. And it's quite interesting. I've recently been in communication with a gentleman called Fraser who was the original, publisher of our industry magazine called Rag Trader.
Okay.
He started the magazine 1972 and he sold it, but he comes back in as a guest speaker or a guest writer, I guess. So we've been talking and I sent him the recording of of that particular presentation. And he just came back and said, I have one question. Where have you been my whole life? I've been looking for this information for so long. But until you've sat on both sides of the fence, then you don't actually have the information in your hand. And I'm in a space of educating people about the industry. So I want to share this information. Whereas I think a lot of people are hiding it away and they don't want to talk about it because they're embarrassed that that's happened to them or that they haven't deep dived into their numbers.
I think you're right, though. People don't want to show that they don't know everything. Yeah. And I think it's kind of a post-lockdown thing, really. People are coming out their silos and they're sharing knowledge. And, people can put their hand up and say, actually, I don't explain that. And not be so protective, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really hope that through the process of seeing that particular webinar, we hold that webinar twice a year. But we have a wait list if anyone's interested in jumping on there.
Yeah.
What I really hope is that people then go full steam ahead into local development and production without that hint or that back of their mind thinking, am I being silly? Should I be doing this offshore? Am I being ripped off? Or is there a cheaper way? And so it really exposes the fact that it's not necessarily cheaper.
But it's sometimes hard to switch, isn't it, really? Which is why it's so important that, people have access to specialists such as yourself, because it just removes a massive pain point. It's so, so, so important. Julia, talking about 3D design, tell me, how can 3D design assist the designer when creating a garment? And are those garments really production ready, as in a digital twin? Have you come across this in your workspace?
We have, and we talk about it a lot in our workspace. I thought I'd stop. My face is really bright. Is it really bright to you too?
Yes. It's
really tiny.
The lights, there you go. The lights changed a bit. You sit back a bit more.
Maybe because it's darker out here.
It's the lights changing. Mine's going very red, actually. There we go.
Okay, 3D printing. We talk about 3D modelling a lot in our workroom about whether it's something that we should invest in. And in Australia, the Australian Fashion Council have just done a big project on 3D designing to see whether it's a way that they can fast track the sampling process. There are a few things that do bother me about it, that people tend to think that it doesn't involve a pattern, that you kind of create this thing on a model or an avatar and it creates the pattern, but it still needs to start from a pattern. So that tends to get brushed over a lot whenever I see anything about 3D modelling. The other thing I see is that where I think it sits very well is if you have an indecisive designer who needs to see something on the model and then tweak and change things. So they might see a long sleeve, long dress and think, no, I want to make it short sleeve, or can we shorten it and can we add that? That's fantastic because that really reduces the number of samples. In our business, we very rarely go over 2 samples. So it's not really reducing it anymore for us.
Yep.
But you still do need to put a garment on a model at some stage because fabric reacts very differently. And I am working with 2 people at the moment who are using 3D modelling. We recently did a presentation last week with Mamaki in LA, and our patterns were put onto a Tugatech mannequin, and it was a male that had a chest that poked out really far and his shoulders were back. And so our T-shirts looked terrible on the mannequin. And I thought, that's not how they look on a body. I've fitted this T-shirt so many times.
Yeah.
And then flip over, I was talking to a customer of ours in Alaska who uses Optitex.
Yeah.
And he was showing our T-shirt on the Optitex 3D model, and that looked fantastic. So it really depends also on the avatar that's being used and how, there's still a lot of development that needs to happen. So I can definitely see that there is a huge benefit, but I don't think it eliminates, or definitely doesn't eliminate pattern making, and it doesn't eliminate all sampling. It just reduces the number of samples, and really more in that offshore, or if someone is looking to evolve their design through the process. That's sort of my opinion on that topic.
I think there's still a long way to go there, isn't there? Most definitely. And I think, we touched on it earlier. There are so many things that can and need to be considered in that journey of a garment from a sketch all the way through to retail and production. And I think sometimes we get a bit overexcited, don't we, about technologies as they come through. They have certain applications, but unfortunately they can be missold sometimes as a whole 360 production solution. And I guess that always depends on whoever's business model it is, whether that is true or not, really. But it's never a one size fits all, which is probably a bit ironic talking in the fashion industry, because that doesn't work out either. Sorry, pardon the pun, but it's true though, isn't it? Really, it's lots of benefits, but not quite there yet. Definitely. Speaking of benefits, then I am conscious of time, Julia, as well here. So, what do you think the benefits of digital printing technologies are for the fashion community, and have you seen a huge a growth in your products with people using digital?
I absolutely love digital printing, and I have for a very long time. And when digital printing really came to the fore, it was just a huge revelation, because we moved from having to print 400 meters of screen printed fabric to being able to react really quickly and do small runs. So all of a sudden, in the world of Instagram and small designers, we could create really unique product, small quantities, to really get our name out there and create a unique product in the marketplace. So huge fan. I encourage my mentees as much as I possibly can to get involved in digital printing. And we have really strong relationships with a lot of the printing companies through our Pattern Room website. The downside in Australia up until just recently has really been the natural fibre space.
Okay.
But we've recently had a cornet delivered into Australia, which we've become very good friends with the people who have taken delivery of that machine. And that is really going to change the game once again, that people are no longer sitting in that polyester space, sublimation printing. They can really expand out. We have another printing company called Next State who we work with quite a bit. I'm not going to be able to say what machinery they have, but they have really expanded that market as well. So I love the idea of placement printing and laser cutting. I love the idea of yardage printing on different substrates. And I think that, people want to be unique now. Again, the industry has changed a huge amount from when we were younger, that everyone wanted to look exactly the same with your Levi 501s and your white T-shirt. Now everyone wants to be really individual. So bringing in that digital printing and that surface print design. And there are a lot of people who are doing surface print design as a hobby now. So there are a lot of beautiful designs in the world that need to get out there, and what better way than on clothing?
It's definitely, artisan communities are growing, aren't they? Really, they really are.
Absolutely.
And when people do want, as you say, garments, they're looking for personalised, customised, on-demand garments as well. And I guess what you're seeing is, in your space, is young, I'm doing it again, designers who, as you say, just want 100 SKUs, but they can print for that. They don't have to print 3,000-4,000 meters.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that means you can get really great turnover on your website, and you stock coming out all the time and printing the same print on a whole lot of different fabrics to create different garments. It's really exciting.
So you're just adding that newness whenever they want it. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I guess, as you say, if you've got the right manufacturer, you've got all of the information and you've trained well, then that's a smoother process. Have you found that the manufacturers are okay for smaller quantities now, Julia, as well?
They are starting to. The problem with smaller quantities, and in our business, we go down to a run of 20 for our mentees. That's part of it, the package they get with our fashion label Launchpad.
Okay.
So 20 pieces over 4 sizes, and then you go up to 50 and 100. Most of the manufacturers in Australia sort of sit around 60 as a minimum, 60 pieces. But it just really depends on how big they are. And really, I think a lot of the manufacturers don't want to go down lower than that because the price has to go up so much that they know it's not viable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So we call a run of 20 a marketing run, which is really just to get your name out there and test your product before you then step up to 50 or 100 pieces.
Okay. Julia, do you think, in your experience with the manufacturers that you're dealing with, is the manufacturing community investing in technology?
Not really. Not in Australia. No. I think, unfortunately, the history of manufacturing in Australia for the fashion industry, we used to have tariffs many years ago. I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK. And when those tariffs reduced, every company rushed offshore in a hurry and left a whole lot of people to lose a lot of money. So I don't think there's a lot of encouragement for people to go into manufacturing. I'm very unusual to be a female in manufacturing at the age that I'm at, which is really just because it's an industry that I love. But a lot of the people are old men and they made their money many years ago. They're just keeping themselves busy, but they're not about to reinvest in new dyeing machines, or we've got a problem. We can't really make a lot of fabric in Australia anymore because we've run out. The machines are too old. Even machinery. We buy new machinery because I don't like buying old machinery and then spending a whole lot of money to fix it up.
Yep.
We've kind of got a viable business model, but for a lot of people it's really hard and they can't find anyone to buy their business afterwards. So why would they invest in a piece of machinery that they're planning that it will last for 10 or 15 years? So more so in the pattern making side, there are a couple of people buying laser cutter or Gerber cutters, which is quite different than the printing industry, which invests quite heavily in new technology, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah, I think it's still early days, isn't it? You know, when we look at the print segment, they say we're 6 to 8% digital, really. If you were to compare that back to the fashion end, really, of how you change historic production, and in a sector of the market that is so margin driven and making low margins too, especially in the mass volume side of things, where do they find the capital and the investment to invest in those new technologies? How does that happen?
And they are talking about supporting manufacturers at the moment. Within our Australian government, they have recently changed the skill shortage list and sewing machinists are on that list. Mm-hmm. And they're looking to support manufacturing a little bit more. But it's always been very hard. Even we have a technology solution for the fashion industry, but we sort of sit outside the fashion industry for that. But there's also some issues within the industry. I do an Instagram live every Wednesday morning, and I think it was 2 weeks ago, I was busting a myth that another pattern maker had on their website that digital pattern making is clunky and boxy and doesn't work, which is not true. It's just that they don't do it. So they wanted to put that rumor out there that technology is not good for the industry, which is just keeping us way back in the dark ages. They are both exactly the same, whether it's manual or computer pattern making. It's up to the operator and what they're doing. So there's a lot of fear around technology, I think, in the clothing industry. And so it's keeping us in a very small backward space that we're not going to be able to progress, rather than embracing it and realising everyone has a different way of working. And as long as the end result is the best result, that's the main thing.
It's interesting, isn't it? I can remember talking to a huge printer here in the UK at the beginning of his digital printing journey. And he said, this is 15 years ago, and he said the hardest thing isn't the technology, it's changing the mindset of the printer, because they think they're going to be replaced. Actually, what happened was they now have this incredible state-of-the-art factory printing, 80,000 meters a week of digital printing, and the actual print they are now the print technicians work in an incredibly high-tech, clean environment, completely different to the traditional, print factory.
Yes,
so
amazing.
it is. It's like you say, busting that myth of fear. Really, is that the new technologies bring new skills, new skill sets, and a quest for knowledge. Really, but it takes time to switch a whole industry.
But I think it's a really important thing, because we also have a huge skill shortage of people who want to go into the technical side of the industry.
Yeah.
And so we need to sell that as an attractive thing to go into, whether it's a beautiful workplace or trying new technologies or being inspired by what's coming into the market. If we don't offer that, then most people who go into fashion want to be a designer. They don't want to be a pattern maker or a garment tech or a machinist, even a sample machinist. So I think it's becoming quite desperate, and we need to showcase the technical side in a sexy way. You know, we need to.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Make it look more.
Exactly. Yeah, we need to get some marketing spin going there, don't we? Definitely. Julia, we've got a couple more questions. Can you share some of your favourite success stories?
Oh, you had shared this question with me earlier, and I have so many. And because I work with around 50 startup designers at any one time, and I have done for the last 10 years, I often forget who the early people were.
Yeah.
So I mentioned it to Kate, who's my 2IC. I said, Kate, who comes to mind? And we have this fantastic designer, Sammy from Dream With Me Sleepwear. And she's been on quite the journey, and she joined our program quite a few years ago now. And then she tried her hand in Sri Lanka, and then she went to China and she tried all the offshore options. And then she came back and she said, I'm just going to make my price point the right price point. I'm never doing that again. It was such a nightmare. I lost so much money. And she has created a beautiful range of silk sleepwear with beautiful, unique prints. So it's been really lovely seeing her evolution in herself as a designer, and really to stick with it and not give up on that journey when it all seemed too hard, but really dig deep and think, well, what's important to me? And she now has ethical accreditation, which is an accreditation we have in Australia, which you need to apply for. And there's a whole lot of checks to do with who you're working with. We have such a number of, there's another one called Harry and Pop, which was a children's sun protection swimwear range, which is absolutely gorgeous. Another called West of the Waves, Sarah from West of the Waves. She is in North Mackay. We work with people all over Australia, actually the world, and some people we never meet face to face.
Yeah.
But seeing how these businesses evolve and the tenacity is what I love. Who is going to get on Instagram and do a live or do a reel and showcase their product, because it's not just about drawing the picture. There is so much more to having a business.
Yep. We all have to be marketers too, don't we?
We certainly do. It's a huge part of business.
Yeah. And 24/7. Definitely. We do. Just before we finish, Julia, could you tell us about the Academy? We touched on it earlier, but if you could summarise what the learning is and how your clients develop.
Absolutely. So the Fashion Label Launchpad is a program that I have developed for people with no prior knowledge or experience in the fashion industry, to teach them about the technical side and the manufacturing side of starting a fashion label. So it's a 1-year mentoring program, and it's a combination of videos to watch, group calls, Ask Me Anything calls, and that one-on-one support as we go through the pattern making, sample making and development process through to manufacturing with our own in-house team. So it really is a combination of learning and support and mentoring.
It's a fantastic service, Julia. It really is. And of course, we touched on this before. It's worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody can join.
Absolutely. And we start off the process through a workshop that we do called the Start Your Fashion Business Workshop, which is a really great way for people to find out what's involved in having a fashion label, whether they're suited to it, and the skills that are needed. And it's really an introduction. And we have another one of those workshops on the 6th of February, which you can find out about on our website.
Isn't it amazing what we can all do when we all work together?
Absolutely.
Out of the silos. It really is. It's fantastic. Julia, nearly there. We've chatted for so long, and I can't wait to meet you in person, actually. Hopefully at FASPA in Munich in May, which will be an absolute joy. Really, really look forward to that. Could you tell us what's next for the Supple Room, and what can listeners and viewers look forward to for 2023?
Well, we are actually going to be launching an ongoing membership that happens after the Fashion Label Launchpad, because it's a little bit cruel to give people all of my information for 1 year and then cut them off and let them float away. It just doesn't work. There's 30 years of information inside me that I'm here to share, and I realise that as businesses evolve and grow, it's a really important aspect. And we're also bringing other mentors into that membership in social media and printing and styling, photography, graphic design to support people through as they grow. So that's a really big thing next year. And of course, our Pattern Room website, which is another arm of our business, will be going to FESPA and also to the States. And that's really another
we should touch on that. We should touch on that as well, definitely, before we finish, because we actually met through the Pattern Room, not Sample Room, didn't we? Of course, it's the same thing, but just different brands. And the Pattern Room is a fantastic resource for anybody to pick up a digital pattern online and use it for their own use. It's fantastic. You've got how many thousands of patterns have you got now?
We're currently up to 300,000 designs on there.
That's rather a lot.
It is a lot. Have you seen the new website? We relaunched a website just this year that makes it much easier for people to build their own garment.
Fantastic.
So it's really exciting. And Pattern Room was really developed because there are some people who just want a T-shirt.
Yes.
And I thought, and they would say to me, I don't want to do a course or anything. I just need a T-shirt. And I thought, you're right. You should just be able to have a T-shirt. But I also knew that the cost of developing a T-shirt can run into $700 or $800. And I was just repeating the same T-shirt each time.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give people access to something that was for those basics that have been pre-fitted by our team and tested hundreds of times on other house models and fit models to create something that's really easy to access. So at least you can dip your toe in the water in that small way, but more importantly that you can use that for putting graphics and sublimation printing and really creating unique garments from something that you just want the T-shirt to fit.
Definitely. Well, that's exactly what we did for sportswear, wasn't it? Together a couple of years ago, actually. And, you know, we'll showcase some of that in Munich as well, I think. And we created a whole range of garments for sportswear. And then we rendered patterns onto it for printing, printed them, and had them sewn and manufactured. It's just, you know, it's fantastic. It's a brilliant resource, it really is. So, Julia, you really are covering the Circle 360 now, aren't you? It's fabulous.
From my heart.
Yeah, definitely. Well, do say hi to Daniel. It's been an absolute joy talking with you. Look forward to catching up next year in person. And thanks for sparing us the time today. It's been fabulous. We could chat for days. You've got so much knowledge.
It's always lovely speaking to you, Debbie. Thank you so much. It's always great to catch up. I look forward to next May where we can catch up in person.
We'll be there in no time at all, won't we?
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Take care.
Take care.